So we finally arrived at the modular mesh set. This is one that I get requested quite a bit, so I thought it was about time we dug in. Now right up front, this is obviously not the only way you can do a modular mesh set, but this is a way that I've successfully made one recently, actually, on a couple of projects. And so I thought that this would be the one that I would show. It's a method that allows for some good flexibility in terms of noodling around and trying to find the actual meshes you want. And it offers some good optimization opportunities at the end, which we'll touch on. So the way that this works, or the principle that it relies on, is the micro to macro idea. So if you've made games for any length of time, or you're a player you're aware of how games are made to a certain degree, you know that game levels are made up of individual meshes. They're very rarely authored as hero pieces. So what you'll have is like a hallway full of columns, and each column is the same column, just repeated all the way down the hallway. So that micro element of the pillar and the wall and the window and whatever else is in the environment have been instanced and copied around and smashed together until they form this macro element called the level itself. And all that we're going to be doing here is applying that micro to macro philosophy for the level to the mesh itself. So the mesh becomes the macro element, and the micro below it are the individual little pieces we're going to build that will be assembled into the various meshes. And it sounds a little abstract right now, I know, but it will make sense, I promise. So let's dive into Modo. We'll look at the high poly, and we'll talk about the pieces that got built and why. So what we're going to base our modular mesh set on is we're going to pretend we've been given the task to build the interior of a Victorian type mansion or house. So we're being tasked to build the walls and supporting structural elements, and not the individual props inside. So not this chair or the lamp or anything, but rather these wall pieces you see in the background. And the best image that I have that shows this off is this one. So we're going to build a little stair set that we can snap in. We're going to build the walls. We're going to build the trims and that kind of stuff. And I'll show you how I piece all this together afterwards inside of UE4. So here you can break this down visually, right? So this looks daunting if you take it as one big hero piece, but that's not the way to look at this. The way to look at this is what are the individual elements that repeat, right? So there's these columns here that mark the corners of the staircase. There's a couple up here as well. There's the railing that runs along the top that gets bent and comes down, and it's across here and it goes all the way down there. There's these individual, they probably have an official name, but I don't know what they are. These individual bars or beams or whatever that line the staircase that go along. If you look over here, there's these decorative wood panels that are tiled along, and over here they get bent down to match the staircase. And looking in the background at the walls themselves, you see there's a top trim piece, there's a baseboard that runs along the floor, there's a chair rail. So inside of Modo, this is the high poly mesh set that we're going to use for this. Now you can see here that what I've got is the individual elements we talked about, right? Here's that decorative wood piece. Here's that pillar or the bar or whatever that tiles along the staircase. Here's that that piece that goes at the bottom of the staircases. There's a topper for the column over here. Over here, there's a generic sort of a wood panel that just is for decorative elements or areas that we need to fill in, and you'll see what that's good for here in a bit. The most important part, well, one of the most important parts, is the stuff up on top here, these trim pieces. So what you've got here, you're starting at the top, there's your crown molding, there's your chair rail, there's your baseboard. This piece down here is just like, it's another kind of railing just in case I want something to go around something else that looks different. And this bottom part looks like the top of the railing. If I go back to the reference image, this thing here, this bit that bends and goes on top of everything. That's what that's meant to represent. So you can see, the decorative wood, the columns, the pillars, all that stuff, that's all represented here in the high poly. Now, two things I would point out about this mesh, two things that I like to do. Now, if you're going to deal with a wood set, I find that doing this kind of color coding allows me to get away with, or it allows me to get creative when I'm inside a Substance Painter, because I can then change the direction that the wood grain runs by having two smart materials applied to the mesh set. One that runs this way, and one that runs this way. So I can make it look like it was different pieces of wood that were glued together, which is much more convincing than having the grain run the same way on everything. And you can see that I've applied that to these slats here that run differently, and these ones here. So that's what those pink elements are that you're seeing. They're a way that I can break out those pieces of wood and change the direction of their grain. The second thing I would point out is that when I model strips that are meant to be trim or whatever, I will model in a break in them. So you see one here, and there's one over here on the baseboard. That tends to help a lot once you get into the actual creation of or laying in the trim pieces in the level, because then you get these natural breaks where somebody maybe ran out of wood and they had to splice another piece in. It just adds a little bit of character to the environment and a little bit of believability, and it's not just like one long tiling piece of wood. So anyway, so with the high poly belt, we'll move on to talking about the low poly next. So I know we said we were going to talk about the low poly, but there's actually not that much to say about it. You can see here, this is the low poly. The goal is, like anything else, to keep it as simple as possible. Try to preserve your silhouette, which is why I have the bevel on the corners of this. It doesn't strictly need them, but if you go back to the high poly, you can see that it does contribute to the silhouette. That edge is not sharp, that edge is kind of rounded. So having that show up in the low poly helps to sell it. But these wood slats, for example, those are intended to be baked flat. So if I go back to my low poly, you can see that's exactly what I've got. I've just got flat planes to bake those onto and to give the impression of them being there. The various trims and stuff are up here. They're greatly simplified. But they have enough detail to hold their silhouette from the side. So if you catch a side angle of this, it'll look okay, and you'll see this bump on the baseboard and that kind of thing. This is the wood trim. You can see that got just really simplified down. Oh, and the reason this high poly is so dense is because this is my frozen high poly. I've already copied the high poly and frozen the geometry, to get it ready for Substance Painter. So this is not the way that I modeled this, but this is my bake source, basically. And I think that's about all I have to say. There's nothing special about the UVs here. UVs are just packed in. I'm not going to worry too much about the wasted space since this is only a demo. But if this was a real mesh, I probably would add some extra elements, to fill in these holes and gaps, because if I have to eat a texture, I want to maximize it. And yeah, that's about it. We'll jump into Substance Painter next, and I'll show you what the bake result looks like, and we'll talk a little bit about the texturing. So here we have the bake finished. You can see we got our details in here. We got our our break that we modeled in on the wood. We got all the details of the wood panel. It all reacts nicely to the lighting. So we're ready to start texturing. Now we're not going to spend much time in here because I don't want to, this is not a texturing demo. So I'm going to throw this, this comes with Substance, I think, this American cherry wood. And this works pretty good for this. I don't like the way the height map looks. It's a bit severe, so I just turned that off on this wood. And you can see that it's going the wrong direction with the grain. But I'm going to fix that up in a second. Well, I'll just fix that up now, but by turning it 90 degrees. That makes it work, mostly. for the trim textures, because now they're all running the right way. They have a nice wood grain in them, and they sell pretty good. Now what doesn't sell that great is the top of this wood, or the top of this wood topper piece, because remember we masked that off on the high poly. We want to have some wood running this way, some wood running this way, so it looks like different pieces were glued together and all that. So, but with a little bit of layering trickery, we can get that to look right, and I'll be back in a second once I set that up. Okay, so I've gone through and I've set up my layering the way I want it to look, and you can see now we have wood grain running in two directions on top of this thing, just like we planned out. And the side benefit of that is, remember that we masked out these side panels too, these side edges. What that ends up looking like is you end up with, since you're changing the texture direction, you get a natural seam that develops here and here. You know, it makes it look like pieces of wood that were put up there and cut and put into position, and it's just all little things like that that help to sell the end visual. So I'm liking the way this looks. It's good for demo purposes. So the last thing we need to do is my usual trick with the curvature map. We'll throw the curvature. I got a few laying around here. I think this is the one. Put the curvature map on top. Yes. Just in the color channel. Set that to overlay. And then switch the intensity down to maybe 25. Is that noticeable? Yeah. So even at 25, you can see how the edges get kind of accented just by overlaying that curvature. So that's off and that's on. And I sometimes would go even stronger than that, like a 50 or something, but that seems a little strong. You know, we'll split the difference and go with, say, a 35. Done. Sold. So I'm going to export this texture, and then I'll meet you back into Modo, because we got to talk about how to export this correctly. So I went ahead and pulled that baked texture and put it into Modo and slapped it on the low poly mesh just so you can see what it looks like. So now that we have this, we can start to actually look at this as a modular construction set. Start to use these pieces to build larger pieces. So right off the bat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to build, just for demonstration purposes, you know, I know that I need these two pieces here to make that column that sits on the end of things. So I'm going to do that. You copy those pieces, paste them into a new mesh. Align that to the center of the world, this to the center of the world. Pull this up so it aligns to the top of the pillar. Let me turn the grid on for a second. Let me grab this thing, drop it onto the floor. Okay. So this is now that end piece, you know, that goes on the various, this part here, for example. Yeah, we can call that this. And we can export that to Unreal Engine 4 as one piece of the puzzle. Now, for another example, we're going to need to build some sort of a railing piece. You know, something that holds all those little bars that goes between the between the columns. To build that, I'm going to grab that piece, and the top railing. Copy that, make a new mesh, paste that in. Okay. Put him on the floor. Move this over. Now this is where it's going to get a little tricky, or a little sketchy. You do have to get pretty imaginative with this stuff. So if I grab those pieces and I check the size on this, the width is 400. That seems a little long. Maybe we want like 200. But instead of sizing it, I'll throw an edge loop in and tear off that half. Okay. So that being the case, let's say that this is roughly going to sit here when it's on top of that piece, and this will roughly sit here when it's on that piece. And if we use a side view, we can see how that sits in there. It's actually a little bit large. So I'm going to take this down a bit so it sits nicely on that railing bit. All right. Grab that, pull the whole thing down so it lines up at the top of that baseboard. Now, excuse me. That being the case, I'll drag him over, copy and paste him, flip him. So I'm burning through some hotkeys here, I know, but this is not really a modeling tutorial. So I flip that over there, and so now we have a base that's sort of built up, and we need to cover this top bit. Now this is where you have to get creative. I'm going to grab that flat piece from there, copy and paste that polygon, drag it down, flip it over, and I'm going to turn on vertex snapping, grab him and pull him into place down right here. Good Lord, right there. Now it didn't quite make it all the way over, so I'm just going to grab that edge and pull that edge over. Now there's some part of you that's screaming, I'm sure. It's like, that's not correct, that's not right, but it's actually fine. It's fine. This piece up here is still looking a little slender, so I'm probably just going to scale him a little bit. And this is the key I found with using this methodology, is you have to be flexible. You have to be. There's just no option. So if I do this, and then I say that I want to clone that bar along, so I'll fire up the clone tool, turn off snapping, and pull him out to about the same location, and we fill up the area in between with, say, that many. Now, one thing you do have to watch out with modular mesh sets is you have to watch out for repetition, right? And since this was duplicated along, they're all exactly the same. They have the same orientation. The textures will all look the same, and so forth. So I'm going to use some hotkeys to give these, say, every second one and every third one. Just keep grabbing them from different locations and flip. Then update the smoothing. Now it's probably not apparent on these, but you can see even panning across here, there are some differences now in the texturing, and your brain is more likely to accept these the way they are. Now if I turn on wireframe, you can see that this got sliced right at the world origin. So that's where its pivot is going to appear, and that's fine for me. I don't have a problem with that. That works for me right there. Perfect. And this column piece, he's right there at the world origin as well. Now I can see that by turning them both on, that my column is actually is too tall. So what I want to do maybe is grab it and pull him down to about where I would want him to be. Grab this, pull him down till he's in about the right spot. And then we can grab these vertices and drag them up, and we'll slip the UVs on that so it doesn't do anything weird. Let me turn on grid snapping just to get that in the exact right spot. All right, there. Okay. Turn off snapping. Now this is a super rudimentary example, but I think you can see where this is going. See, what other pieces do we need? We need that wood panel piece as well, because he kind of forms the base of the staircase. If you look back over here, we have this thing going on. So what I will do is I'll just grab that mesh piece and make that a mesh by itself and export it. And you'll see what all that looks like inside of Unreal Engine 4 here shortly. I'm going to do a few of these, do a couple more of these meshes up and shoot them over to Unreal, and then we'll finish up talking there. Okay, so with all of that done, now we get to the meat and potatoes. Now, like I said at the beginning, this is a good technique you can use when you're not exactly sure what you're after. Like if you have specific concept art that says wall pieces look like this, and this is the decoration panel, and so on and so forth, this might not be great for you. But if you have a loose idea, like, oh, I want it to look like a wooden mansion or something, working with these individual little pieces can be solid gold. And I'll just show you real quickly, we'll build a couple of things here using these individual pieces that I've spat out from Unreal Ed. Now we have some pieces that are more complete, like this railing piece that I did. You saw that earlier. And we have more super simplistic pieces, like this is just a quad that has a bit of that texture map to it. And I did like an individual staircase beam as well. So there's all kinds of little pieces we can noodle with in here. So again, we're talking about taking that micro level and moving it up to the macro level. So these are my micro pieces. So I start assembling. I throw in, let's say, the top of that, and then I'll throw in, actually let me do this. Let me copy and paste that and then just replace the mesh. All right, fine, rotate around 90 degrees. And I say, okay, I want that, and I want to have another piece on the end here, like that. Maybe spin that 90 degrees so it doesn't quite have the same orientation. I'm like, okay, that's good. So that's a nice railing piece. And even that right there, you could say, okay, so I want this to be one of my macro meshes, because I'm going to use this like all over the place. You could then use, well, you could use Modo to put this together once you've established the way you want these pieces oriented. Or you could, inside of Unreal Ed, as I showed in a prior video, and I'll link that up above, you can use the mesh merge functionality within here to create these merged meshes yourself. But for now, we'll just stay with individual bits. So I say, okay, that's great, but I want to have this on the side of a staircase that has room down below for something else. So I'll pull it up, and we'll duplicate these two and give those a flip. And then grabbing these, I'll pull it up so that's kind of sticking out a little bit. All right. Then grabbing these, copy and pasting again. I exported just the top of the mesh, or just the top of the pillar. So it's just this piece here. I'll drag him down to the bottom and say, okay, that looks like a decent construct. I'll copy this down with an alt drag, and I'm going to put this decorative panel in. Put him in here, and I'm sure he's backwards. There he is. Swing him around to here. Position him where I want him to be. Once the camera's not in a weird spot. So if I say I'll pull him out to here, well, you know what, let's leave him back a little bit. Say there, just to give some depth information. And we still have to fill in the bottom of this panel, so let me grab the baseboard. Well, let me copy this down again and replace the entire thing with a copy of the baseboard, which will rotate around here and snap into place. Okay. Now you can see this piece, it doesn't exactly fit where I want it to fit. It's got a bit of a gap, and this is where I was talking about the scaling. So if I turn on my scale tool, I can just sort of scale him into place. Nice, nice and easy like, and just get him so he sits exactly where I want him to sit. Thank you, right there. Now you have an even larger piece that could be used for the sides of staircases or the sides of, I don't know, walls with raised levels and things, right? So there's another macro mesh that you could have created. And just for fun, let's do something weird. Let's drag this piece in. So we'll start from here and say that I want to get some kind of a wall panel that I can stick up against things. Okay. Well, I'm going to grab one of my... Actually, this is the same piece that goes on top of the of these beams. Good Lord, I wish I knew the name for that. But we'll drag him in here. And I'm going to rotate him up, say 90 degrees, and position him so he's sort of on the side of there. Copy him over to here, Okay, good. Now I'm going to copy him up to there and maybe flip him on the Z axis. The Z axis. My Canadian's coming through. There we go. So he's flipped up there. Then I want to grab him, pull him up. Now I guess we'll throw in the baseboard again. Put that in position, and I might go ahead and scale him in a little bit. Pull this up to say here. I'm going to lower my grid size down so I can get him so he overlaps that and looks cohesive. All right. Now I'm going to want to pull this up. Oop. Once I'm done screwing up. Pull this up and say, well, why don't we put some decorative panels up top here? We'll do that. Drag him up to there. And I decide, well, actually, yeah, that works. So if I do this, pull him up a little, and then scale him evenly so he fills the space, pull it back down, and maybe I don't want this piece down here anymore. No, maybe not. Maybe not. So if I do that, pull him down to here, and then we'll say, can I get away with even just... See, I reset his size back to what he hold on. Turn off the uniform scale. All right. Turn him over. Pull him up. Put him on top. Use the scale tool to pull him in until he fits. Push him up to about halfway between those two. Grab this baseboard, pull it up. And I'm going to use this railing piece again to go in there, but this time we're going to rotate him, say 90 degrees this way, just to give it a little bit of visual variety and to cover a bigger space. So I'll pull him into position there, and again up here, but up here we'll give it a flip across the across the y-axis, yes, to vary up the texturing a little bit and kind of pop him down so he fits. But I still have a bit of a gap, so we'll just give him a quick scale up so he fills the space. And that could be a decorative wall panel that you end up doing. That doesn't look the greatest, and I probably wouldn't use that, but you get the idea, right? You mix and match, put things together, and then once you're happy with your macro pieces, you can merge them together and make larger pieces. And that's really the crux of the technique. So that's the basics of it. We breezed over some stuff in here, I know. Yeah, we didn't talk about light mapping, but we've talked about light mapping in the past, and it's really no different here from doing a prop. You kit bash your pieces together, and once you're happy with that kit bash piece and you build your macro piece, whether you're using the stuff inside of Unreal to merge meshes, or you're doing it in your modeling app and re-importing it later, you need to build a valid light map. I'll put a link to the light mapping videos up above here. Optimization wise, we already talked about it. You're going to have to merge these pieces together later. Having all those little kit bash pieces strewn across an entire level is not going to be very performant. So you will have to do some merging later. But what I like about this technique is that it gives you the flexibility to noodle, with shapes. And it's ideal because, say some level designer has handed you a BSP shell, and they're like, yeah, I'd like this to look like a Victorian mansion. And you're like, okay, cool. I can't change any geometry. I can only lay meshes on top of what they've already built because they've already established the gameplay. So using these little kit bashy pieces, you can lay all that out the way you want it to be, and it'll conform to the level exactly the way you want it to. And then later optimize, merge, and light map, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I believe this video has run on long enough now. Hopefully you find some value in this technique, and I'll see you next time.